My name is Mukasa Dada, and I am formerly Willie Ricks. And Willie Ricks, who was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I was born there in 1943. In 1943, I lived in pure segregation. I lived in the communities where we went in the back door, said yes to the white folks, couldn't work decent jobs, making $2, $3 a day, no justice at all in the system. If you go up against a white man in any way, you would automatically lose or go to jail for even calling a white man a lie. So in Chattanooga, Tennessee, my mother and father grew up there. They lived there, came there from North Alabama, and they lived in North Alabama where they picked cotton and worked in cotton fields. And I used to go to North Alabama, and pick cotton. And one time I complained to my mama, I said, we work out here all day long, from 6 in the morning to 6 at night, get $3 a day in the hot sun. She said, well, I used to work out there for 25 cents a day. And when she worked out there for 25 cents a day, she was basically a slave. And her mama said she worked out there for nothing. And her mama's mama knows work for nothing. So as I worked in the cotton field in Alabama, it was segregated, but black and white worked and chopped cotton in the same field and right next to each other. But then they had to go different ways and what have you. And that experience made me see how difficult our people were living, because all of my folks in Alabama lived in pure shacks. No running water, no toilets, and none of that kind of thing. No lights, using lamps. And so we drunk out of dippers and all that, so we could see slavery. And in Alabama, I began to see that there was something wrong. And when I went back to Chattanooga, I grew up there, and then as my time moved on, when I was a young man, I couldn't see. I had very bad eyes, and the school system flunked me 3 times, and then they came and said, son, you got bad eyes, you can't see. And by then, I was frustrated with school. I went out there and quit school in the 7th grade, went to the streets and started hanging out, stealing, doing whatever. And then I went to the pool room, and I began to grow up in the pool room and learn from the community men in the pool room. And then I finally got a little job waiting tables for white people at the hotel. And as I got a job at a hotel, it was segregated. We worked like dogs, and we made probably $6, $7 a week. And I remember one time we worked 93 hours, and they gave us $63. And we had added up the different parties we worked, and we asked the manager, why this money ain't right? Why we get $63? He said, what would the owner think if we gave some niggas more money than what you got? And so at that time, my attitude began to change toward the hotel, and I realized that it was a business. So in the hotel, I began to, sometimes they have liquor, and when they had liquor, we had to serve a bar. I would serve one bar to them and put one bottle in my pocket, and I began to do that kind of thing. And then shortly after that, I began to go hang in the schools and say I wanted to be in school. And my twin sister-in-law was in 12th grade. And I went to school every day just like I was a student, hung in the halls and whatever, became very popular. And shortly after that, the city movement started around the country. And the students got involved in the sit-in. And I immediately got involved also. And when I got involved, we started demonstrating, going to the white people's restaurants, and sitting in, and going standing in front of theaters, sitting in. And we did that and started going to jail over and over again. And matter of fact, we had the first riot, the first rebellion, where we threw bricks and balls in the movement. We had the first one in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And then the civil rights leaders from NAACP, SCLC, all of them rushed up there. And when they rushed there to teach us about nonviolence and what have you, I remember when the guy first came to teach me about nonviolence, he said, let them slap you, let them spit on you. And I said, well, let me slap you. And I went up there and slapped that man so hard. And I don't know what happened, but that slapping him made me one of the most nonviolent people in the movement. I took beatings and bombings and jails for a long time, but shortly after, Martin King and them told me that an organization was being formed called SNCC. And when I joined SNCC, and when I joined SNCC back in '62, it was formed in '61. And when I joined SNCC in '61, the movement was it was happening all over. When the sit-in movement started, people started sitting in everywhere. And when they started sitting in everywhere, what SNCC did is called all these students together and began to organize them into the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And when they organized us into the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, I took that challenge. But in Chattanooga, where I went to jail, they burnt crosses in my house yard. They threatened my parents over and over again. They attempted assassination of my sister and niece, and we had many attacks. But I left Chattanooga and went and joined SNCC. And when I joined SNCC, I went into the Albany movement. First place I came was Atlanta. And I demonstrated at Richards and the places downtown protesting against segregation, where we couldn't go in the bathrooms and Richards or lunch counters, all these different places had, and we protested. We started going to the AU Center, taking students downtown to protest and what have you. And then I was assigned to Alabama. And when I was assigned to Alabama, I worked in Gaston, Alabama, where the people marched, and when they marched, they were beat so badly by the state troopers, they stuck elected Protestants on the people. But they were beat very, very badly. And then shortly after that, Birmingham came off, and I was in Birmingham. And I was in Birmingham, and we were marching and demonstrating and facing dogs, and people were being beaten and jailed by the mass. And one of my jobs was to keep the movement, just keep the marches going. And we would charge the police and whatever. But they came and they would throw dynamite at the houses of the different leaders in the movement. I remember me and Dr. King and SNCC people, all of us, hundreds of, I guess, SNCC people and the whole movement people, we were in the Gaston Motel, and they put a bomb in the motel while we were sleeping in the motel. And the hotel blew up, and we just flew out our beds. And then, not only did they blow the hotel up, they blew up one area so much that they used to call it Sugar Hill. It had to name Dynamite Hill. Mm-hmm. So we faced a lot of violence. And then shortly after that, they put a bomb in the church and killed the 4 little girls in broad daylight. And at the same day, they were shooting people in the streets. So we found ourselves in a war. And then shortly after, Birmingham, Gaston, Selma, we were all over Alabama. SNCC sent its staff, SNCC sent its staff to about 100 different places to organize movements. And when they went into these 100 different places, at any given point, we had 100 demonstrations going at the same time. And then shortly after protests, demonstrations in Birmingham, Albany. Are you trying to say something? In Birmingham, Albany, the Albany movement kicked off. And in the Albany movement, we organized and marched, and we marched downtown. The students marched downtown from Alabama, from Albany State College. When they marched downtown, they were beat up, they were put in jail and expelled from school. And the students committed themselves that since we're out of school, we're going to continue to march. And when they continued to march and protest, the movement spread. The march appeared to the maids and the workers inside of Albany, Georgia. But then shortly after that, we started working voter registration. And the voter registration appeared to the farmers and the people that worked on the plantations. And we went and we started telling them about their freedom and their rights and what have you. And we started trying to register people to vote. They started throwing dynamite at our houses and our churches. I remember in Albany, Georgia, they shot up, they put hundreds of people in jail. Hundreds. So many people went to jail that Dr. King came down and they put thousands of more in jail, and they put Dr. King in Reedsville prison. And then after putting Dr. King in Reedsville prison, we filled all the jails up. And one of our lawyers, C.B. King, he came out to the fairground to check on some of the young people and the people that was put in the fairground prison jails being held there. The sheriff, Cub Cameron, came out there with his deputies, and they attacked C.B. King, attorney C.B. King, and his wife, and they beat a baby out of that woman's belly right out there. So we were facing war of violence. And then we went out to the rural areas and tried to register people to vote. They would come by our houses. They went by Agnew James' house, and they shot up his house, shot it up, machine gunned it. He had, I think, 11 children, and bullets went in his children. One bullet went in one of his children's pillow, and when the bullet went in the pillow, we could see the seriousness of what we were facing. And the church that we would have our mass meeting in on the Lee County Highway, they came by and they threw a bomb. They bombed the church, threw dynamite in the church and blew it up and burned it down. And then in Dawson, Terra County, they did the same thing in Sassa, Georgia, burnt down the church. And so these are the kinds of violence that we face. And in Dawson, they would throw dynamite on the porch of the house where we live, and sometimes they would come by and machine gun it. And then at the same time, we had a movement in Selma. Selma, we were facing all kind of terrorist violence, where they were beating us, jailing us, and we were just under attack for trying to register people to vote. And that terrorism was so great that it was putting fear in people, but the freedom fighters just kept coming and going to jail and taking the beatings, and it got to such an extent that later we invited King to come in, and King came and joined in with us, and that's where you see where they beat the people on the Edmund Patterson Bridge and what have you. But this was happening all over, bombing in Birmingham. And you know, we sent a whole delegation of SNCC people to Mississippi. And when this delegation of SNCC people went into Mississippi, they went in, it was demonstrations, protests. The movement had earlier went into Mississippi through the Freedom Rides. And when they went there with the Freedom Rides were put in prisons, and violence took place. And then when they went in with to register people to vote, a lot of our people were tortured and murdered. Fannie Lou Hamer, severely beaten. Charlie McParker, shot in the head by a county commissioner. The Mr. Damon's family attacked by a group of white men, Klansmen and sheriff and police. They came to his house and started shooting at his house, and he shot back. But by the time they got through, he put his family out the back door and held them off. By the time they got through shooting, he was dead and burned up in his house. And then you had to murder Meg Evans. You had to murder Metcalf. You had to murder Worley Jackson. And then you had to murder of the 3 civil rights workers. You had the death of Viola Liuzzo. You had the death of Reverend brother that got beat over the head in Selma. I forget his name right now. But a whole lot of people just being murdered. And then the 3 civil rights workers, of course. But people were being murdered. We were facing terrorism. They were burning down our church in the summer of '64. They burnt down 64 churches. Now we're talking about a people that don't have a right to vote, don't have a right to go in the front door. We're basically slaves. And we were fighting against slavery. By 1965, after when we marched across the bridge and they beat John Lewis, our chairman, we went into Tuskegee and we mobilized the students in Tuskegee. And when we mobilized students in Tuskegee, they came and we took over Dr. King's church in Montgomery, his first church that he pastored in Montgomery, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And we used that to protest and attack the Capitol, because the church was a block from the Capitol, to attack the Capitol and protest against the Capitol. We were attacked in the church. The police surrounded the church and began to attack us. We went into Alabama State and got the students and used them to start marching and protesting with us. And when the students at Alabama State marched, they ran horses over them and beat them down and bust ribs, bust their head, knocked teeth out. But they faced an extreme violence. And then, shortly after then, we, all over the country and everywhere the movement was, we were bloody. We were being bombed, we were being killed, and it was an extreme. So by 1965, we went into Lowndes County, Alabama, and we made it clear that we were going to pick up guns. That if any white man or anybody tried to attack us because we're trying to organize our people in Lowndes County, we would use guns to defend ourselves, and we became known as the first civil rights group, or not the first, because Robert Williams had picked up guns in Monroe, North Carolina, and then we had picked up guns. When we picked up our guns to defend ourselves, the Democratic and Republican Party didn't allow us to vote, so we formed our own party, and our party was called the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and we had to have a symbol. We chose a Black Panther for our symbol, and that symbol became known as the Black Panther Party, and historically that's where the Black Panther Party started. Black people with guns in Lowndes County, Alabama. And then when we Stokely Carmichael and Rap was in charge of an area called Greene County, and he was attempting to do the similar thing, organize a party in Greene County. And so SNCC, everywhere that SNCC went, every town, we sent 2 people, 10 people, 100 people to different cities or different counties throughout the South. The one thing that each one of them had to do is form a local organization. And the local organization, if they went to Albany, they had to form the Albany movement and then organize a staff to run that movement and create local leadership. And then they had to start a youth movement, and the Albany Youth Movement, and the youth would be the troops that march and demonstrate and protest, and the elders would be the Albany movement. That's made of the elders. They would be the lawyers and the leaders and the brains and the economic, and help get people out of jail and whatever, but make the decisions. And SNCC saw itself as a servant or as someone who advised. Even though we protest, demonstrate, and did everything everybody else did, we tried to lead the way, but we were not leaders. We just examples of freedom fighters. And then by 1965 again, after we had started the Black Panther Party, Stokely, all of us, we had been attacked. We had an election where we ran black people for office in our party, and we didn't win the election, but we had stood up. And we had slogans, tax the rich, defeat the poor, and stuff like that. And we were talking about a black sheriff and what have you. But we set the tone. And shortly after then, a young man named James Meredith. James Meredith was the first black student African student, to go to school and to integrate the University of Mississippi. And when he integrated the University of Mississippi, probably 1960, 61, somewhere around there, when he integrated the University of Mississippi, there were major rebellion. People were killed. There were riots all over the country. White folks went crazy. But he was able to stay there and integrate it. And then after they passed, when we got in the streets and had millions of people in the streets all over the country and support all over the world what was happening to us, the apartheid, the racism, the segregation that we were living in, we got support from all over the world. And when we got this support, we forced a civil rights bill and a voters' rights bill that say that they couldn't discriminate against us and we had a right to vote. But at the same time, it still was going on, and James Merriam decided after the voters' right to walk through Mississippi after they burnt down 75 churches and they had beaten and bombed and did so much. And we know that after hundreds of years of racism and terrorism toward black people, that they would still have somewhat fear of these people. And James Merriam decided to walk through Mississippi and say, with a sign saying, don't march against fear. Don't have no fear, register to vote. And a white man shot him in the back on the first day. And when they shot him in the back, Dr. King, Stokely Carmichael, Whitney Young of the Urban League, Floyd McKissick of CORE, and the other civil rights leaders all met at the Lorraine Motel, the hotel where Dr. King was killed, and we met and decided to carry that march on. And at that time, we let them know that SNCC, SNCC, organized the state of Mississippi. We had lost our soldiers, our members in death in Mississippi. We had been bombed and shot, and that we were in charge of Mississippi, and that if Stokely told King, if we go into Mississippi, if we are attacked by white people, we will fight back. And Roy Wilkins and many other the civil rights members, they said that they could not be a part of such a march. So Dr. King decided to stay, and Mr. McKissick stayed. And when they stayed, they went into we went into Mississippi, and we also brought in a group out of Bogalusa who Snick had worked with, who picked up guns early on also to defend the nonviolent civil rights people. They would march on the other street with their gun, and they called themselves the Deacons for Defense. And that shortly after we started marching, there was an attack. Stokely and the police got into a push and a little fist throwing, but Dr. King jumped and broke it up and whatever. But that set the tone for the march. We went through Mississippi. When we first started, we had the old freedom cry, freedom now, freedom now, freedom now. And as we got deep into the march, we began to change the slogan. I began as my organizer, Mukasa, as my tactic was, I traveled and go to different areas up from the march, 30 miles this way, 50 miles that way, and we would have rallies. And I would go and I would rouse these people up. What we need is unity. What we need is strength. We need to come together. And if we had power, they couldn't do this to us. They couldn't murder us. We had power, we'd have decent schools. And we had power, we wouldn't live in shacks. And we had power, we wouldn't be lynched. We black people, we need black power. And we started talking about black power. That excited the people. Black power, black power. And all in Ruralville, Mississippi, Miss Heyman knows, black power. And just all over Mississippi, the black power cry began to rally. And then we came back and said to the SNCC people, Stokely knows, we got to use this black power. And we started talking about hitting them with black power. Black power became dominant in the march. Black power. And we had first started out, we had white people in the march, marching with us. We told the white people, go home to white people, go home and tell your family and your friends and your neighbor not to be racist and practice racism against black people, we don't need you here with us. And we put the white people off the march. And that left Dr. King and all of us in the march got more militant, black power. And when we were attacked in several places, we threw bricks and balls at them, we fought back. When they attacked us in Philadelphia, Mississippi, in the town where they killed Cheney, Swan, and Goodman, the same sheriff, when they attacked us down there, they came shooting up our neighborhood. Dr. King had led a march earlier, and when Dr. King led the march earlier, they ran a truck into the march and ran over some of the people. And that excited the people. They started fighting back and rioting. And then that night, the white racist group decided to come into the black neighborhood and shoot it up. And when they came in the neighborhood, Ralph Featherstone and some others, they was waiting on them, and they started shooting back, and 2 deputies got killed. And that night, when we had a rally, Dr. King, every night when we would march so far, we would have a rally, and we would pull a truck up, and Dr. King, Stokely, and Abernathy, and Andy, and all this, and Roy, not Roy Wilkins, but Floyd McKissick, and would all be on the back of a truck, and we would make our speeches from the back of that truck. And that day, I made a speech, and I said that when they ran over our people, and then came into our neighborhood and started shooting, and we shot back, and 2 deputies got killed, that was black power. Black power means that we will defend ourselves and we will fight back. And they had everybody, black power, black power, black power. And this black power got so strong, and it got a militant nationalist attitude, that Dr. King and Andrew Young and them decided that they had, and Ralph Abernathy, decided they had to cool black power off. So that night, Dr. King got up and made a speech. We don't need no white power. We don't need no red power. We don't need no brown power. And then he said, we don't need no black power. He said, we don't need no black power. We created on black power, black power. So black power began to dominate the march. And then Abernathy, his partner, got up and said, what we need is green power. And we hear black power. So that was a split between the civil rights, traditional civil rights people, and now you have the birth of a black power movement.